and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And first of all, I would like to thank Connie Willis for filling in for me last week. Nope, she's not a relative. But I fell off a ladder and I did this kind of funky roll back and smacked my head right on my walkway. And it was a concussion. I had a concussion, and it made things very murky. And that was just 2 days before the show last week. And for the most part, I was kind of like spaced out in a dreamlike state. And I didn't even have to pay for it. It was free. However, I do not recommend you try this at home. I know I have a bad sense of humor. I get told that all the time. We're doing things differently this evening, as I only have our very sensible guest, Greg Bishop, on for the first hour. Then in hour two, I hope to hear from you, the live listener. You can call and say hello. You can discuss what our guests talked about on the topics. You can tell us about a personal UFO sighting you had, or whatever you would like, as long as it more or less pertains to the UFO topic. And that number to call is 603-967-4030. You can also Skype me at Marty Willis. That's MartyWillis. That's my Skype username. All you have to do is search that under add contacts and just dial away. So I'm going to be closing the show about 40 minutes after the second hour with the pre-recorded news I did with Alejandro Rojas, UFO updates. And it's pre-recorded, but it is unedited. I like to do the news unedited because, first of all, I'm lazy. And secondly, it keeps the live show feel, so to speak. So I want to thank all of you that support the show. And if you can't support the show, we still appreciate you. And you can listen to the show free live every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's right here on podcastufo.com. There's a chat room there as well. And you can also listen to PSN Radio. That's live. We're streaming through that. And we run every Thursday on the Dark Matter Digital Network. And that's at 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time as well. So, Greg Bishop, a little bit about him. In 1991, he co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, the paranormal conspiracy, psychedelia, and new science. His first book, Wake Up Down There, anthologized the articles and features. Greg's second book was Project Beta. He has a new book, and it's called It Defies Language, and it's kind of an essay of a whole bunch of UFO and government, there's kind of fringe issues and personalities and all that. He also has a radio show called Radio Misterioso, and that's radiomisterioso.com, just how it sounds. And it's in its 17th year, and this guy was doing podcasts before podcasts were even invented somehow. Anyway, he's ahead of his time and a sensible guy, like I said. Greg Bishop, welcome to the show.
Hey, Martin. Yeah, well, it wasn't a podcast then. It was on a FM pirate radio station. That's when I started.
Oh, okay. But you were in the online really early, though, weren't you?
I moved when the FCC busted the pirate radio station about a year later in 2000. September of 2000 was my first live internet broadcast, and then the podcast started in about 2006, 7, something like that. At least live internet, and also posted on my site. Now that's all it is. It's I do the live shows from my house, and then the shows are posted within a few weeks anyway at RadioMysterioso.com.
Oh, I see. So you do a live radio show from your house and record it as a podcast.
Yeah, so if people want to listen live, because I like doing a live show. I don't know why I still like doing that, but, most people listen to it later. I get, 20, 30, 40 people listening live, and then, a few thousand people listen on, for upload.
Yeah, I think it's similar here, but I love doing, I don't know why, and I have an odd name for a live show. It's Podcast UFO, of course. But it is live. I tried it live once, and I just can't go back. And it saves a lot of editing, too,
Oh, I still do the editing. I occasionally say things, or I say or whatever. Or we get into something that I don't think is very important. Or I say something I really didn't want to say, and I don't want to broadcast again. So, it happens. And people can say whatever they want on my show. I mean, they can swear or whatever. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's just freewheeling.
Well, it's. I have heard someone that does a podcast say that once you have a podcast, it's out there. Once you publish it, it's out there. So if you don't like it, edit it. And but I don't, and so hopefully we won't feel as though we would have to edit anything out of this one.
No, well, you probably do a smooth show. I think I do, but then I listen back to it and go, I don't like. And plus, I was a sound engineer, and I still am, but I was paid as a sound engineer for 15 years. So I have an audio, I have an audio bug where I need things to sound a certain way and be a certain way just because that's my thing. So I just happen to be an audio person, so that's probably another reason. If I wasn't, I probably would just post it, without really worrying about it.
Yeah. Now I see on your icon on Skype the Pascagoula alien.
Yes, you're one of the few people that actually notice what it is.
Yeah, and I had Calvin Parker on a number of years ago. What a nice gentleman he is. I don't know. Have you ever spoken with him?
No, never. I mean, I was intrigued that he was speaking about the sighting against what it wasn't really a sighting; it was a close encounter. Many years later, because Hickson did. He wrote a book about it, which is a fascinating book if you can find it. What did Calvin Parker say?
Oh, it was very interesting. That whole case is really fascinating to me. How he kind of faked the fact that he said that he passed out when he hadn't. That type of thing, just so they'd leave him alone.
Yeah.
But what a nice gentleman he is, and kind of a unique story is he got connected to an estranged daughter through my show after she found it on the internet. So I was really happy about that. Yeah. So for the person that does not know Greg Bishop, can you just give a little background and how you got fascinated by the subjects in the beginning?
I don't know. I started reading UFO and anomalies books, Bigfoot, ghosts, cryptozoology, even though it wasn't called that then. I started reading those when I was a kid, and I went through all the books in one library, and then I went to another library and read all the books there that I hadn't read in the first one.
Wow.
So that took me a few years, and, that was from age, 8 or, 6 or 8 till about maybe 13.
Wow.
And then I stopped reading about it and stopped caring. And, I got older and, partying and girls and all that were interesting. And then after I got out of college, I had this horrible week where, my girlfriend left me and I got canned from my job. And one of my friends, who I thought was a really good friend, basically stiffed me for a lot of money. Anyway, all this stuff happened in 1 week.
Oh,
so
God.
I was very depressed, and at that point, I read a book. I read an article that was an excerpt of a book by Robert Anton Wilson. I think it was from what's the book? The New Inquisition, the one about how science is sometimes scientists act like priests in a religion and protect their information rather than expanding it. Anyway, I was, at that point, I was in such a low period in my life, and I think I read that at just the right time, and it got me right back into it. I don't know why it did it, but it did. I guess I just needed something to cling to, and that was what interested me. And then, in a different way of thinking about it than I had, previously read. So,
wow.
Since then, I've been all into it. Then about a year after that, I met Bill Moore and a few other UFO researchers, and I was kind of back into it again, and I haven't stopped since then.
Well, while you just mentioned Bill Moore's name, now I understand you're still friends with Bill?
Yeah.
And are you must be one of the very few UFO-related people that remain friends with him. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's interested in talking to anybody because he doesn't want to talk. He just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. It's just nothing he's interested in. Yeah.
Now, I know someone that was seated in the MUFON meeting. It's actually someone I'm sure you know as well, Chris Lambright. He was telling me about that whole situation when Bill just came out with the disinformation thing. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. You were there too. Wow. Yeah. So what was that like?
It was the best speech I've ever seen given anywhere, mainly because of the reaction. I've never seen so many people upset in such a dramatic way so quickly.
How long did he go on about it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess an hour and a half, 2 hours. I have since I don't know if it's online, but I've since located a recording of it. Actually, somebody gave it to me, and you can see them stop every once in a while, and you can barely hear people yelling because the microphone was very bad. It was real good for a foot or so in front of the microphone, but you could, the state section director got up and said, please let him finish. He's a guest, and he told me beforehand, he said, I'm going to say something that's really going to blow everybody's socks off. And I said, what? And he said, well, I can't tell you. Because he lived in LA at the time, and I was in communication with him. I saw him every probably 2 or 3 weeks anyway, because he lived about probably 3 or 4 miles from me. But when we got there, I said, I guess, and he wouldn't tell me what hotel he was in or anything. He just stayed at a hotel separately from everybody else. He didn't submit his paper to the symposium proceedings that they printed up. And then he came up on stage and said, the government messes with some of you people, and you have to know that they're doing it. And I know that because they did it to me, and they had me basically watch while it happened to other people. And I couldn't really do anything about it. He said, because he had an agreement where he wouldn't. Anyway, so everybody saw it as a huge betrayal, and most people got very upset with him. And later, there are people that have said, well, we caught him red-handed, so he had to admit what he was talking about, what he was doing. And his side of the story was, I was so sick of people accusing me of things that I wanted to get up and tell them exactly what I'd done, as much as I could, so that people would stop spreading rumors and saying what wasn't true. So I told him exactly as the truth as he saw it, and. After that, nobody wanted to talk to him anymore. And about 5 years after that, he just said, well, forget it. Also, his deal with the government was that he would get UFO information in exchange for his cooperation. And he did, but none of it was really very useful.
Wow.
Ultimately, it didn't prove anything, except that the government was interested in the subject, which we already know.
Isn't that something? So I was just going to ask you, what baited him into doing that. So very interesting. Now, I know that there's a lot of controversy about different subjects. MJ12 is another one. And your book, Project Beta, I'm sure touches on all this stuff. And the Paul Benewitz case, which is tragic and fascinating both at the same time.
Yeah.
And had you ever met Paul?
No, I never met him. When I went out to work on the book, I found out from his son when I was asking him to cooperate with the book that he had died the week before I got there.
Wow.
And he was kind of upset with me and told me to leave his office, which was very disheartening and upsetting to me, but I told him, look, I've been contracted to write the book. I'm trying to be fair about it. And he said, I don't care. I don't want to be involved in it. And his father had just died, so I'm sure it was a very bad time to ask him. I didn't know this.
Yeah. I'm wondering if he or any other family member has read the book or would even want to.
I don't know if they have. I mean, if I was them, I don't know. He had, I think, 2 sons and a wife. I'm not sure if the wife's still alive. She was, as of a couple of years ago. I don't know if the sons have read it because nobody has heard any reaction from them whatsoever, and they just don't want to get involved. I mean, it's something that messed up their family, probably shortened their father's life, and they just don't want to talk to a bunch of UFO wackos about it.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably did shorten his life. I do want to say an update to the listening audience. Back several months ago, I was working at an auction house. A friend of mine owns it. And in a trunk that belonged to an ex-CIA agent that was stationed in China and Japan and places like that, the owner of the auction gallery found copies of the MJ-12 documents. Now, so the follow-up, there is no follow-up. I have not had a return call from the son. I just wanted to find out why he would have those documents. But I have not heard, this is a follow-up for the listeners, I've not heard back from the son on that. Which I think, Greg, don't you think that's kind of interesting that a CIA would have copies of those documents?
Yeah, but I think he probably got it from open sources and just had them, or it was something that they had in the office. Just because a CIA person has it doesn't mean that they're official, real documents. It just means it's something that person was interested in, real or not. And I think some people, including I think Kevin Randall, as far as I know, have decided that MJ-12, Stanton Friedman has not. He still maintains that it was a real group. But some people, including Bill Moore, have come to the conclusion that it was a real group, but it had nothing to do with UFOs or anything. It was just so obscure that it was really, and so secretive that it was really easy to hang the whole UFO thing on it.
Wow.
Because there was no real record of it except that, Cutler Twining memo where it said, the MJ-12 meeting has been postponed or whatever. So, yeah, most people, a few researchers are kind of convinced that it had something to do with continuation of power in the event of a nuclear war or something like that, and nothing to do with UFOs, but it was really easy to hide the UFO thing on it, and that most of the documents that have UFO and MJ-12 in them were forged by somebody in the government who knew what they were doing. A lot of people think Bill Moore did it. I don't think that he had the wherewithal or the know-how to do those things.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor.
I've heard it multiple times. I don't think he did it. A lot of things in ufology, I think, are very mixed up with people's emotions. And a lot of people think of Bill Moore as the villain. He's a friend of mine. I know his motivations. He's told me the truth as far as he can tell me. And if he can't, he just says, well, I can't tell you about that. He's never lied to me. I've never caught him lying to me at all. He's told me things that he doesn't want me to discuss publicly, and I never have. But to me, he's been very, honest and forthcoming as much as he can be. So I tend to agree with him on most things. He didn't like everything in Project Beta. He said some of it upset him, but he didn't disagree. He didn't say that they were false, which was very interesting.
Ah, okay. And in that book, did you actually talk about what I have not read that book, by the way, and did you talk about his involvement in the whole situation along with Richard Doty?
Have I talked to him about it?
No. I'm sorry. In that book, does it discuss Bill Moore's involvement?
Sorry, that's my phone.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, it does discuss Moore's involvement, Doty's involvement. I wrote this book over 10 years ago, so it's kind of hard for me to remember everything.
Sure. Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm sure people come up to you in your podcast and say, remember when this was on? You're like, I don't even remember saying that. So when you ask me these questions, I answer to the best of my ability. But, Moore's involvement was you do things for us, meaning this group within the government, and we will give you UFO information. So he did things for them like tell them what certain UFO researchers were into, what they were looking at, and what they were interested in. Not because they cared about what they did with UFOs. What they cared about was if they knew anything about national security stuff. Like, if they said, I saw this thing in the sky and it was, near a Air Force base or something like that, and it had something to do with a secret program. They wanted to know what people were looking at and thinking about because they didn't want that stuff getting out. Even hints of it. And if it was getting out, they wanted to know who knew it and who knew it, in their networks of intelligence people in other countries so they could kind of trace who knew what. That's what it was for. It had nothing whatsoever to do with trying to make UFO researchers look bad or give them false leads or anything like that. I don't think, at least the thing that Moore was involved with was just an intelligence operation. That was it. Let's find out what people know and who know, what they know and who they know. That's really all they cared about. And Moore said that he would cooperate with that. He even did things like he would get they had spies in Russia, because this was in the 80s, that were working for the government or working in defense factories, and they would, or in some part of the defense industry, and they would send them reports. But the reports would be on these little cards that were from from UFO researchers in Russia. And they'd send them to Bill Moore. They'd say, dear Mr. Moore, I'm a researcher in this country or this part of the Soviet Union. I'm really interested in this case, or this case happened here, and I'd like to, tell you about that, start a dialogue, whatever the hell it was. But the thing was, it had nothing to do with that. There were coded messages in these cards, these postcards. So he would call a phone number, he said, and we would read the postcard exactly as it was, punctuation and everything, because the code was embedded in it by telephone, because there's no internet yet.
Yeah.
So he, and then when he was done, he sent it to a specific address, and it was a different address. He would put it in an envelope and send it on to another address.
Wow.
And it was a different address every time. So there was weird spy stuff going on in addition to all this UFO stuff that people know about. And as far as I know, he was asked to pass one piece of disinfo to Paul Benewitz, and he told him to take it with a grain of salt. And Bill said he locked it in a safe and never talked about it. I'm sure it affected his thinking, though. How could it not? A weird thing is that everything that he said that had to do with Greg Valdez noticed this. Gabe Valdez's son, he has a book called Dulce Base, which is amazing. It's a really good book. If you want to read Project Beta, read that one after it, because he doesn't agree with me on some stuff, but it's a really good companion piece. What he said was when Benewitz was talking about UFOs and aliens and all that, it made no sense whatsoever, had nothing to do with reality, and there was no way to check it out, and nobody's ever been able to prove any of it. However, when he was talking about defense projects, he generally was kind of right on, because they would tell him what was going on so that intelligence people from other countries that knew that he knew some of this stuff would ask him. So they would give him, bits and pieces of information about secret projects, often misleading ones. And then they'd see in all their communications that they were monitoring, and people they were monitoring who talked about the same stuff, so they knew who was listening to Benewitz and what they were talking about. So it was a very complicated thing, having mostly to do with all to do with national security. The only UFO part of it was that Moore was supposedly getting information, classified documents occasionally, which he did. And at this point, he tends to think most of them are probably partly or mostly fake.
Wow. Yeah, Disinformation. I was listening to a political show recently, and the Dan Carlin, and he was talking about disinformation that the government does, and by mixing in truths with false information, which is exactly the same. It's their bailiwick, what they can what they do to cover secrets, which I think is really interesting because it kind of ties into the UFO field. Now, Dulce, I would like to talk about that because that's just one of those places that's really mysterious. Whether there's an underground base in fact there, or was it all to steer, Paul Benewitz away from watching what was going on across the street? So what's your ideas on Dulce? I mean, I think I've heard you say before that some people have claimed that they're certain that there was some type of underground base there of some kind, military.
Yeah. What's interesting is what Greg Valdez found out from Gabe's his father's files after he passed on. I was very good friends with Gabe. His family was incredibly nice to me. They're great people, and I was very sorry when he passed away. His son, though, and he told me some of this stuff before he died, but of course I didn't look at his files or anything. He showed me some of them that were relevant to Project Beta, and to Benewitz, but not all of his stuff, because he was heavily involved in the cattle mutilation mystery too, very, very early on. What he told me, and I trusted him because he's a level-headed guy, law enforcement, was that he thought there was some sort of base there. He did not, at some underground facility. He didn't know if it was a base or what was going on there. I think he tended to think it had something to do with biological warfare. The funny thing is that when his son's book came out, Dulce Base, he said that, and this is in line with Benewitz saying if it was a secret project, he was generally kind of pretty near the mark. What he seems to think it was, and what was indicated to him in the notes, was that there was some kind of base that had the capability to have aircraft land in it underground. It sounds like James Bond or something. Wow. The funny thing is, it fits. I don't know. I've never been there. I don't know if this is totally true, but it's coming from somebody whose judgment I trust. Namely Greg and especially his father. And it fits in with the stuff Benewitz said he was seeing and what people up there were seeing. They said they saw things. A lot of strange things flying through the air. In addition to the cattle mutilations, there were a lot of UFO sightings. I think there kind of still are, not nearly as much.
Yeah, but, I understand that it is a real strange place. That's what a lot of people do say that.
Yeah, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, really. It's on an Indian reservation, sovereign Indian land, which is a whole nother piece of the puzzle, too, because if you have agreements with the tribe, you can kind of do what you want. Mm-hmm. Almost, because the laws don't apply there. The laws that apply on federal lands or private lands do not apply on tribal land. So anyway, and that includes maybe some companies or parts of the military that want to do something there. Anyway, people saw things flying around there quite a lot. Benewitz and other people said they saw things flying in and out of the mountains there, like into a mountain. They couldn't tell where it went. It just disappeared, like went to a mountain, then disappeared and looked like it went in. Benewitz said he could see entrances. I don't know how many other people have said that. Gabe actually told me that there was an entrance. I said, have you ever seen an entrance to an underground anything in the backcountry there? And he said, yes.
Really?
I said, well, what was it like? And he said, what it looked like is there used to be one, and somebody had just covered it over or dynamited it or whatever. But you could see that there used to be something there, and it was bigger than a mine. It was just some big entrance, possibly. So he said he tended to believe Benewitz on that account. So who knows? They might have been testing some very strange, exotic flying technology out of a base inside the mountain there. I think that's more likely than aliens invading and having a base there and flying UFOs in and out of it. Yeah. So that's as far as my thinking and research has gotten on that. So I entertain the possibility that there could have been some underground facility of some sort in the mountains north of Dulce on the Jicarilla Apache tribal land. Also, there's strangely enough, there's been Bigfoot sightings there too, which is great.
Wow. How about that? One of the things I thought of is why wouldn't the locals know? But you kind of address that if it's on a reservation, then everything kind of changes a bit. Like I wondered how people could come in through the road, the transport in supplies, stuff like that. But of course they could fly in things if that's what they were doing. But it's always been kind of a mystery, like if there really was something like a military underground base, so to speak. I'm not saying aliens either, but some type of military secret base there. It just seems like the locals would seem to know about it.
Well, they know at the time they knew there was something going on there, definitely. If there was an agreement, the tribal elders or whoever has, whoever runs the government there or the tribal government may not necessarily tell everybody what they're doing.
Right.
It's, I don't think it's as open as we might think it is. And different tribes do things differently. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak for the Hickory Apache tribe there. I don't know, but it's happened before where some people in the tribe made, there's factions and schisms, and some people make an agreement with some outside agency so they can do something. And it's not, it's not agreed upon by everybody or even told to everybody. It's happened before, so this could have happened in Dulce as well.
Now, you mentioned earlier, going back to Paul Benewitz, the Paul Benewitz case, that basically it was more or less to find out what people could find out. So he said he saw a craft flying out of there. Are you thinking that it's some type of experimental military craft that he was seeing?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If he did see something flying out of it, and other people saw things too, that perhaps it was some type of experimental military stealth craft that had radar and, or more importantly, optical stealth, because he said he could see things flying and then they would disappear in midair, as if somebody had turned on some cloaking thing or whatever. I don't even know if I put that in the book, but that's something he had reported. And I think, as far as I can remember, other people had too. So it wasn't just Benewitz being some crazy person. I mean, he was seeing things. The funny thing was that people in the government were telling him to go there and look for it.
Yeah.
And I think they were doing that because they wanted to know who, because the only people that pay attention to him were, one, UFO people, researchers, and two, intelligence agents from other countries.
Wow. So
sometimes the same, wrapped up in the same person.
Mm-hmm. Now, this thing about when he was given a computer, do you think that, I can't remember exactly the details of that, but he was given a computer and then he started seeing images and things on it.
Yeah,
this is going back to early computers. Yeah,
this was, 1980 or something. So you can, he knew how to build computers. He was really smart electrical engineer. He built his own computers and wrote his own software. So, at one point he had built computers and had written software or encoded software in the hardware or something it isn't software at that point. It's just he built computers that were designed to decode things he was hearing coming from the base. And he thought it was aliens talking to, talking to their base or people in the government or something. And he said that, he was hearing things, about some sort of invasion, and it was freaking him out. The government did not like that he was actually decoding some of the stuff they had spent a whole bunch of money to encode. I think it was microbursts, and where it is a burst of radio signal that just sounds like static. But if you have the right decoding equipment, it can be decoded into a lot of information that has been compressed into a tiny little bit of a radio burst. And this was 1978, 79, 80, when nobody even knew anything about this. Wow. So Benewitz was figuring this out, freaking them out, and they said, well, okay, you know what? We're tired of having him, he's getting closer, I guess, to what we're doing here, and we don't want him to do that. So let's get a trusted person to bring him a ready-made computer with all this stuff on it. Because he trusted the government. He thought he was working with people in the Air Force. So, and Bill told me this, and I put this in the book, and I specifically mentioned in the book that he was the only one that told me this, because, of course, people have trust issues with Moore. The reason I put it in the book is because I wanted to find out if anybody could verify it. What he told me is that J. Allen Hynek, the famous UFO researcher that everybody knows, was the one that had given the computer to Benewitz, had shown up at his door with the computer and said, here, this might help you. This is from the Air Force, because he was still on the Air Force payroll. He didn't really do very much, but I think he got a stipend from them, and every once in a while he was asked to do something, and this was one of the things. Now, that's a very explosive and kind of frightening thing to say. So, I got in touch with the Center for UFO Studies, and multiple times, at least twice, and I said, look, I'm trying to find out if something that happened with Paul Benewitz in 1980 or whatever it was is true. Do you have any of Hynek's files from that time that I could look at? And they never got back to me. I think I bothered them maybe 3 times. Yeah, well, they got back to me saying, yeah, we'll look, but then they never got back to me after that. So there's no way I had of confirming this. I didn't have the time to, and at this point, I don't really care if I do or not. But like I said, it's a very important part of the story, and if true, is an interesting look into, what Hynek was still doing. He probably had no idea what he was doing, delivering this computer. They probably just said, give this to this guy and tell him that it'll decode messages or something. Oh. And of course, Benewitz would know who Hynek was. He probably freaked out when he showed up at his door and gave him this computer. I don't know past that what the story was. And it could be totally false, but Moore said that Hynek told him this at some point in the 80s, in the late 80s, I believe. So I don't know if it's true or not. I would love to find out. I would love to find somebody else or some other way of confirming that story was true. That's the main reason why I put it in the book. I didn't put it in there to spread a lie or start a rumor or anything. I want confirmation of it.
Would you say that the just kind of like a blatant term that the Air Force actually drove him crazy?
No.
Okay.
I think they helped quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because he was very unhinged before he even talked to the Air Force. And people, it's like, well, how do you know that? It's like, because I can't remember his name. The UFO researcher in I can't think of names anymore. Early abduction researcher.
Sprinkle? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Leo Sprinkle was sent to Benewitz's house by APRO to find out about this woman, Myrna Hansen, that said she had a weird abduction and she had seen a cattle mutilation and all this during it. Leo Sprinkle was flown to Albuquerque on Benewitz's dime to come and do a regression with her. And he said the first time he came, they regressed her and they got a little bit out of her, but they weren't sure. And so Benewitz said, could you please come back? So he came back a month later, and he said at that point Benewitz had a gun and a rifle, and he came to the door and said, they're here, get in here quickly. And it's like, well, who's here? He said that the aliens, they're around. It's like, this was months before he even contacted the Air Force. So he was already well on the way to ruining his own life. It's just that the Air Force, because they wanted, and the CIA and NSA, whoever else was working at the base there, they didn't want him to spread information about defense projects to foreign nationals and to the Russians and the Chinese. So they said, well, why don't we just, instead of telling him to stop, they said, well, he's already got people listening to him. Let's just take control of his perception so that we can tell him what we want to tell him, and that information can get out, and then we can find out who's repeating that information, so we'll know who's listening to him and what they know, and also tell them the wrong stuff.
Wow.
So that they get disinformed through Paul Benewitz. Anyway, and then anytime Benewitz said something about aliens, so-and-so, this and that, they'd say, yeah, sure, that's very interesting, Paul. Why don't you tell us more? And by the way, this is what we know about that. And they would go back and forth with him, and it just made him more and more and more paranoid, and he ended up in a mental institution. I mean, I think his family put him there for about 3 months.
Wow.
Until he calmed down. And then after that, he dialed way back on the UFO stuff. He was still interested in it, but he wasn't nearly in the shape that he was before that.
And how long was that until he
just
passed?
Sat back, let him do whatever he wanted, let him go, let him, as long as nothing was being revealed, they didn't really care how crazy he was getting.
Mm-hmm. How long was it after he kind of slowed down that he passed away?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I went there in 2003. Mm-hmm. So this was probably 87, 88. So what?
So that many years.
Probably 15, 16 years. He lived, it wasn't like he went into a mental institution, was crazy, his health was affected, and he died. No, I mean, he lived about what, 15, 16 years after that.
I see. Okay, because I was
So that's why I
confused
said
about that.
I'm sure it shortened his life because he was chain smoking and he was losing sleep. And strangely and frighteningly enough, he said that somebody was sneaking in at night, injecting him with chemicals, which is kind of scary. I don't know. And the funny thing is that both Moore and Doty told me they saw his arms and something was being injected in his arms, and they swear they don't know what the hell that was.
Wow, that's bizarre. Now, you just said Doty said, so have you've actually spoken with Doty? Richard Doty?
Yeah, I interviewed him for the book extensively.
Oh, wow.
He won't talk to me now. He got mad at me a couple of years after the book came out.
And why is that?
Because I said he was involved in the Serpo thing, and he absolutely insisted that he wasn't, and I was pretty sure that he was, and he got mad at me for that and said he never wanted to talk to me again. Which, I'm sorry for that, but it's no big loss to me. I don't mind. He can go ahead with his life. I really needed to talk to him about the book. And people say, why do you listen to anything he says? It's like, because I get clues and hints, and sometimes I get confirmation. I don't believe everything. I didn't believe everything he told me, but I did when it coincided with things that other people told me that, were not in the government. So,
yeah, I think it was Mirage Men. Was that? So he was actually on that, and I believe he talked a bit about that. Were you contacted when they were putting that together?
I'm in about 30% of the movie.
Sorry.
No, I went to New Mexico twice. I was on camera for quite a bit, and much of the stuff in that movie is based on Project Beta. And much of the stuff in Mirage Men is based on Project Beta. However, Mark Pilkington, who wrote the script for that and was producer of that film, he went further and contacted more people and dug a little bit deeper into it.
Wow. So no one else is really, I haven't seen Richard Doty interviewed really by anyone. He might have been on Coast to Coast, but I
he was on twice.
He was. Mm-hmm.
Once when Project Beta came out, when I was on, and once when Serpo was going.
Wow.
Those are the only two times he's ever been on, and then I said he was involved in Serpo, and that was a disinformation operation or something like that, and he got mad at me for that. And I was like, well, you were on Coast to Coast when they were talking about Serpo. I can't believe that you weren't involved in it. Well, what I said, it was something to do with disinfo, not to do with a government operation, nothing to do with people coming from a planet and astronauts from Earth going to their planet and all that. I'm 99.9999 almost certain that there's no truth in that whatsoever. What I think is true is that had something to do with some other kind of military operation, probably passing messages back, coded messages back and forth through these releases. And that's what Doty got mad at me about. He said, one, that's not what it was, and two, I'm not involved in it.
Wow. Well, I know we've talked a bit about this, and we've got about another 15 minutes or so. So I wanted to ask you also what you consider a really good UFO case that's unexplainable. I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know you're very level-headed when it comes to UFOs. And by the way, there's a interview with you and Alejandro Rojas on Open Minds. I think it was back in June, and I suggest to the listener to check it out. It's really good. Really enjoyed that. What are some other cases that you think are really, say, important?
The Pascagoula case, like we said, that's really important. I think, some of the earlier ones when, it's not because I'm old or anything, because I'm not horribly old, but I think some of the earlier ones, before people had any specific idea of how they were supposed to describe something or how they were supposed to react from the culture about what something might be, or from UFO researchers or whatever, I think those are more important when people didn't quite know what was going on and didn't really know, there wasn't a script like there is now. And Pascagoula is one of those, and Eagle River with Joe Simonton with the pancakes is one of those, and the Papua New Guinea Father Gill case, that one always fascinates me. I love that case. No explanation for it that I can think of. No mundane explanation, unless it was some sort of device with military or private company they were testing. But in 1960, whatever it was, 65, 4, whenever that thing happened, it was I don't know if anybody had those capabilities. That's not to say that I think people are coming from other planets in structured craft. I do not know. I'm entertained more by ideas that don't really have anything to do with aliens coming from other planets and structured craft, but do have to do with people's ideas about what's going on, how they report what they've seen, how they remember things, how the brain forms a strange experience into something that makes sense to you, things like that. Which is why, like I said, I'm more interested in cases when people did not know what they were supposed to report. And I read somebody posted something on my Facebook Radio Misterioso page about it was an article by a psychologist, I believe, and it's a woman psychologist. I can't remember her name, but she was saying that most of our memories are probably false anyway because we can't remember exactly what happened. It's all everything we throw in there to try and make it make sense afterwards. Anything from what we did with somebody 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last week when we went out to lunch, all the way up to, UFO abduction and all that. And that's interesting to me because I don't look at it as it explains everything. It's like, no, it really points up the problem of human perception and what's involved in human perception, memory, traumatic, when a trauma is going on, because seeing a UFO or having a close encounter especially is kind of a traumatic thing. It's jarring, traumatic, unexpected, and so I think it's really important to look at the instrument that is recording all this, which is us, and see how it records input, how it remembers input, how it recalls it, tells the story to ourselves and other people. That's really interesting to me. It's what I'm going to be talking about at the UFO Congress. Alejandro, I sent him a proposal for a paper, and he said, yeah, that sounds good. So in February, I'll be speaking about that kind of stuff and bringing up some of these weird cases, some of the very anomalous cases. There's a very good one, if I may, from I think it's called Mchilin from Poland in the 1970s, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Because the witness had no access to TV, movies, very little access to newspapers, so he had no background. But he met these two guys on the road on his horse-drawn cart.
Right.
Oh, have you heard this case?
Oh, yes. I think your speakers are on. I'm hearing feedback when I speak.
Okay, I'll turn them down. Is that a little better?
No, might be a Skype thing.
Okay, well, they're completely off now.
Yeah.
But anyway, he saw a couple of short guys with greenish skin with big feet that look like, scuba flippers, he said, and or that's what he described them as. And they took him to this thing that was floating in a clearing in a field that looked like a big box with screws on the side like drills. He got taken up to it on a platform with pulleys. So people are saying, "Oh, these are screen memories." I was like, "No, they're not. I think he just didn't exactly know what to make of what was going on, and that's what his brain and his recall and everything told him was going on." And they made him take off his clothes, and they kind of ran instruments over him, but they didn't really do anything to him. He said he looked at the door, and there were a bunch of birds, like 7 or 8 crows that were flopping around like they were almost dead. What the hell were those doing there? The door he came through looked like it rolled up like a rolled-up carpet. I mean, what kind of UFO is this? It's not what everybody thinks of when they think of, alien abduction. And then he bowed to them, they bowed back, and he went and stood on the little platform and went back down, and they left. And other people saw this thing in the village too. One kid said he saw it fly over, independent of this guy, and with somebody's head sticking out, looking down at him. So this is not typical, UFO report. And it fascinates me because it means that it's further evidence that, our perception really determines what goes on. And I don't think it's because the only reason we only see grays or whatever now is I think that's what people expect, maybe even subconsciously. So,
wow. One of the things I think about, by the way, that story, I did hear that, and I was at a UFO conference, I can't remember where, but I think he joked with them or something, or they got along. He got along with the so-called aliens or something.
Yeah, it was just some, it's like, I wonder why they want me to take my clothes off. Okay. And then they ran some instrument over him, let him put his clothes back on. Apparently they were fascinated by his belt, which is kind of weird. They were eating something that looked like little sticks with tapered ends, he said, that looked like the consistency of cake. Well, what the hell's going on there? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think that's a clue as to we have to be more concerned with how we perceive things than what we think it is. Because if we think it is something, that's where all we're going to think it is. I was like, it's aliens coming from other planets and structured craft that looks like this. It's like the disclosure movement to me. I will not accept any disclosure from the government unless it's exactly what I think it should be. Because if it's not what I think it should be, then it's a lie and a cover-up and all that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. Your answer is encoded in your question. You know what I mean? So wow. These are ideas that are running through my head recently.
So the other one you brought up briefly, you said something about a pancake one?
Oh, yeah, the Joe Simonton one where he was Eagle River, 1960. These are all in the 60s and 70s, some earlier. A guy heard a noise. He was like I forgot what his job was. I don't know if he was a lumberjack or I have no idea. Anyway, but he heard a noise in his driveway. He went out there and he said he saw something like two inverted bowls put together and they were black. Or no, I'm sorry, they were shiny on the outside. And the inside, he went and looked in the door and it was completely black, like flat black, matte black. He said there were a couple guys in there and one was cooking something on a grill. And they asked him to go get some water to fill up like this jug they gave him. So he just went and filled it in his faucet and brought it back. And he said the guy kind of nodded and thanked him and gave him these two little cookie pancake things. And then they got the thing closed up and it sailed off over the, why would the guy make that up? I mean, the guy had never really seen such a thing. He wasn't exposed to such things, which is, it's important to me that he didn't really have any background in it. He didn't know what to expect. And he had the little pancake thingies or cookies, and he gave one to the Air Force. He kept one, and I think he had three. But he kept one. He gave one to the Air Force, and I can't remember where the other one went. But anyway, wow. the Air Force did an analysis of it, and they said these are buckwheat pancakes. They're nothing. There's nothing weird about them whatsoever. So did he make this up? I'm pretty certain he didn't make it up, but why buckwheat pancakes? I mean, I love these things that don't make any sense because the whole thing doesn't make any sense. So, I don't know. I was thinking if you meet it halfway with its nonsense, maybe you can figure something out.
Yeah. Wow. Now, getting back to the perception theory you were talking about, I believe you said some woman came up with. What about things like mass sightings or when people, as far as memory go, a lot of things are documented, on film, say when President Kennedy was shot or something like that. So are you saying that all the different people remember it differently?
I think they might remember it slightly differently, but then we get into areas, and it sounds like I'm going down this infinite regress where I try to, explain an unknown with an unknown. But I think if something happens in a certain area and there's a certain number of people that see it, I think they probably all have pretty much the same. Since it's apparently, even if they're all from the same culture and their same same kind of background and all that, I think they have an agreement somewhere. In their subconscious, I suppose, of what the thing was. Like you see a film of a UFO. We've never seen a film of something walking out of a UFO. We always just see it from far away. Never really that close. So, the more interesting cases to me are the close encounter ones, so 500 feet or less, because very weird things start to happen to people. Further away, people just see shapes. They see something flying through the air, doing very weird things with lights all over them, giant triangles, all that. But as you get, closer to people, you might have a good answer for this, and it might blow all of my ideas to hell. But have there been a close encounter case, like an occupant case with with 10, 15, 20 people? I haven't heard of one. It's always one person, maybe two. The majority is one person, the close encounter
Well, there
case.
was that case in Australia on the side of the highway where all these people stopped, where the beings got out of the craft.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I'd like to look it up.
Yeah, I hope I'm not getting it wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Australia.
Well, I'll look it up because as I'm doing this paper, I've basically written it, but I'm just modifying it as I find new things. And I'm not going to. I don't want to say something where I ignore some data or ignore something. If it's one thing, I might say, well, there is this one thing, and that might blow my whole thing out of the water. But I would like to know, as you said, I try to be honest with what I'm talking about. I don't want to talk around things or lie about something or be intellectually dishonest about it. So, it'd be interesting to see if there's one case where there's extremely clear that a bunch of people in one place saw the same thing close up. It still wouldn't prove to me there's aliens coming from other planets. It would just prove to me that, at least in this case, a lot of people saw the same thing at once.
Yeah. I mean, there's just the schoolyard cases, Westall, and also in Africa that you just mentioned earlier.
Zimbabwe.
No. Yeah, Zimbabwe.
Or no, maybe it was South Africa, because Cynthia Hind, the researcher down there, did all the research on that. Yeah, that's another thing I'm interested in. Does what appears on our local environment conform to what we think it should conform to? And does everybody, and do the people looking at it actually affect it physically? I don't know. There's a theory now coming about, becoming more prominent, about an information-based theory of reality rather than a physics-based, which means that if it's just information, if reality is made of bits of information, we can, in a certain way, we can probably make it into whatever we want it to. It's just that most of the time we agree what it's going to be, and that and that's why we see reality as it is. The other thing is there's a cognitive psychologist, we're almost out of time, from UC Irvine, who gave a TED talk. I think Donald Hoffman is his name. His idea is that our perception is determined by our evolution, meaning there could be 100 different things going on in there, or 1,000 things going on in your local environment, but you're only going to care about the 2 or 3 things that concern you. And use those to your advantage, either to eat or run away from or go towards or reproduce or whatever you're going to do. And that you could be missing like 99% of reality.
Wow.
That's a fascinating idea to me too, and I think it's very relevant to the UFO thing as well.
Yeah, I've mentioned before that our senses only actually absorb so much around us, and there are just things that we can't detect with our senses.
Yeah, if there's a close encounter going on and 1 or 2 or 10 people are looking at it, what if they all turned around 180 degrees and looked in the other direction? What would they see? I'd be fascinated to know what they'd see if they weren't looking right at what they were supposed to be looking at.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So why don't you tell the audience where they can find your show and all that stuff, your website? I think you have a couple of websites, don't you?
Yeah, I got one for the book, itdefieslanguage.com, which I haven't updated in a while, which I should now. Most of my activity is either on a Facebook group for Radio Mysterioso, RadioMysterioso. It's spelled like in Spanish. And there's a Facebook group for that, and also RadioMysterioso.com that has shows going back, 10 years now.
Wow.
And you can get in touch with me through that or through the itdefieslanguage.com site. And if you put in Greg Bishop on Amazon, then all the books I've written will come up. Project Beta and Weird California and the new one, It Defies Language, Wake Up Down There. I think that's all 4 of them. Anyway, so that's all my info.
Great. Excellent, Greg. Well, thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you again in Phoenix.
Yes, definitely. Get in touch before we go over there, and then we can figure a place to meet.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, take care, and thanks again.
You too. Thank you so much, Martin.
Sure thing.
All right.
All right, so that's it for our guests. And so now I am counting on the listener. If you could give a call, there's 2 different ways you can call. You can call through Skype, and that Skype name is Marty Willis, MartyWillis, or you can call 603-967-4030. So if you'd like to call and talk about a sighting, a recent sighting, or about our guest, comments about some of his topics, or any of that, I look forward to hearing from you, and we got someone already here. Hello, and welcome to the show, and your name, and where are you calling from?
This is Bobby in North Carolina.
Oh, hey, Bobby, how you doing?
Good, man. Just got home from work a little bit ago.
Yeah. You always jump in the chat room like about this exact time every week.
Actually, it's about 15 minutes later. I left half an hour ago,
Right.
But of course, as things go, I got down the road, and sure enough, there's a train going across the tracks and had to wait for it. But I still made it home 15 minutes early. But, yeah.
All right. So, Bobby, what did you think of, you got probably just, 10 minutes or so of the guest?
Yeah, pretty much not a whole lot, but apparently he hasn't done a lot of homework on a lot of stuff.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, he just didn't know about a lot of reports that our really intelligent people you got on your show knew about, like the Father Gill case and the Ariel School and stuff like that. There has been a lot of, mass sighting reports. Also, the Phoenix lights, but that wasn't a close encounter, I guess.
Right. He was talking about beings. And, I spaced that out a little bit when we were talking. I forgot about the Father Gill case, and I couldn't think of the Ariel School, even though I talked with Randy Nickerson, who, by the way, just to let the listener know, Randy will be on with the Ariel School encounter within 6 months, and he's going to have a couple of the witnesses, a couple of the children now grown in their 20s, that are going to be on the show. It'll be a great one when that happens. And that's within 6 months. I'm not really sure exactly when.
Yeah, I think one of the girls was actually at one of the conventions here not that long ago.
Yeah, Emily Tripp.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I saw Emily speak for the first time last year in Phoenix, and it was tearful, and she was quite amazing, actually. It was very good.
Yeah, that's a neat story. I mean, it's mind-boggling. I can't imagine even had been there at the time. It's pretty interesting stuff. I got a couple things for you. A few weeks ago, I told you that I saw something coming home, and I talked to people at work, and a bunch of people saw it, and everybody said, well, it was a plane. But everybody kept saying that it seemed like it was heading down. So I'd actually asked each of the people, I'm like, well, did you see a plane? And every last one of them would say, well, no, I just saw lights. I said, so you didn't actually see a plane? And then I'd ask them, did you hear a plane? And every last one of them said, no, I didn't hear it. So I called, there's a little local airport in town here that's actually a daytime airport. It's just, for like hobbycraft and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It's a little runway, basically. It's a dirt runway. So stuff can't land there at night. So I actually called the guy and got a hold of the manager. I guess he owns the property that it's on. It's actually 3 or 4 miles from here. And I talked to him. I said, well, did you have anybody land out there recently? And he said, no. I said, well, do you ever have airplanes land there at night? And he's like, never, generally not. And then he said, except if it's a military craft, they can do whatever they want. I'm like, oh, okay. And I thanked him, and I didn't explain myself or what I was looking for, and I kind of hung up. And I kind of figured after that he was scratching his head going, what was this guy asking me about? Anyways, it turns out, from what I can figure, it was probably a military Osprey. Oh. And I was in the car going down the road, so I didn't see the craft. I just saw it go across the road, but it was just above the treetops. and I looked at some of the lighting diagrams for the ospreys, and it looked like it probably was an osprey, because they do fly directly over my house. It happens every few months. There'll actually be 3 or 4 of them that fly over the house, and they're neat. They're the ones with the tilt rotors. They can actually take off like a helicopter, but then the tips, So that's what I guess that was. But the interesting part is, in talking to several people there, one guy told me about a sighting he had in town, in the little town that I live. He was coming to work last winter, and he saw, it looked like the letter V, but in lights. Not real bright lights, like dim lights, but like, a Y. He said it looked like a Y. And he said it looked to be just a few hundred feet off the ground. He said it was over the railroad tracks directly in town, and the town's very small. It's only got a few lights and stuff. And he said suddenly it kind of moved over sideways, like the letter Y actually moved over sideways. The long part of the Y was pointing east. And at that point he said he realized, at first he's like, what am I looking at? And at that point he realized, well, this is kind of strange. And then a few minutes after that, it took off. And so that was kind of interesting. If you just start talking to people, they'll always come up with stories. And the other interesting thing that I had not that long ago, I was wearing one of your podcast shirts. And I got a buddy that I work with who's an engineer, and I've been to his house a few times. We go shooting a lot. And I ran into his wife at the grocery store. And she looks at my shirt, and she goes, oh, let me tell you a story. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. She goes, that's real interesting. And she said her father was in Kecksburg, and he actually saw the flatbed with the thing with the tarp on it going down the road when it was leaving town.
Really?
I was like, are you kidding? Yeah, she actually said this to me. I believe her. She's retired from the Air Force. The guy I work with, he's an engineer. He's a great guy. There's no reason for me to doubt anything they would say to me. And, she started telling me a little bit about it, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But that's all that she really knew, is that her dad had actually seen the Kecksburg. He had told her, I saw the Kecksburg thing on a flatbed when that happened so many years ago, I guess in the 60s.
Right.
So, and he recently, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, do you know if this gentleman is still alive?
No, he passed away just about a year ago from cancer.
Oh, that's too bad. I was going to see if I could connect him with Stan Gordon.
I've been working at the same place for 13 years. I've known this guy for all that time, and, if I had known something like that, I would have asked him about it years ago, but I just happen to be wearing your shirt. So.
Yeah, it is definitely a conversation starter. I
get some weird looks when I'm out about the town sometimes. Somebody will, they kind of just stare at the shirt and then look at me and then stare at the shirt, and they don't really say nothing, but something's going on in their head.
Yeah, I get that too. Don't worry. Yeah.
How's the head feeling?
I'm doing really well. I hate to say it, I get a little spacey now and then, and hopefully that's not coming across too bad on the show. But I'm definitely recovering. It's just it's kind of a slow process, I've been told. But wow. I would not recommend anyone do that.
Wow. Yeah, I told you, I called you the other day, and I for some reason early last week, the weekend, I just wanted to give you a call, and I had no idea why. I'm like, I need to give him a call. I haven't really talked to you on the phone since we went to the show here in Greensboro.
Is it 3 years ago?
Right, exactly. We haven't actually talked on the phone. And I'm like, well, he's probably busy. I know he's always got this stuff going on, or he's doing some of the antiques, and I just kept blowing it off. And I'm like, well, he's probably busy. He doesn't have time for me. And then I heard about your head thing, and I had a premonition of something, but I didn't know that you were going to be falling off a ladder, because I would have called you and said, hey, stay off the ladder.
Stay off the ladder, yeah.
So that was
well, I have to come clean about that. It was my own fault. If I just had a little more patience and set the ladder properly, nothing would have happened. But I was working on siding on my house, and I just was running up and down the ladder and not paying attention. So all my fault. Okay.
Well, I got a couple of UFO things that I've seen in the past I can talk about, and maybe somebody else will call in. Maybe we can turn it into an impromptu show where people call in and talk about stuff that they have seen. Because that'd be interesting to hear somebody else other than Donna talk about their stuff. I've had two they're really interesting. One that let me go like this. About 3 years ago, a little bit over 3 years ago, I used to listen to my phone at work or an MP3 player to listen to music, and after a few months, I pretty much listened to my entire music library. So I discovered podcasts, which is, they've been around for a long time, but I just discovered them maybe 3 years ago. And I ran into Open Minds at first, and I started listening to that. And then as I was listening to these UFO podcasts, I found Don Ecker and several other people, and I started to remember stuff that had happened to me in the past that I just forgot about. I just started to bring things back to memory. And one of the earliest memories was driving around in a van with my brother and my two nephews. I was a little kid. This is in the early 70s in Sweetwater, Florida, which is actually a suburb of Miami. And this is my earliest memory of stuff. We're driving around, and my brother sees a glowing red sphere, UFO, or orb, whatever you want to call it, and he actually starts to try to chase it. And it was exciting. We were all in an old Ford van. Back then it was a 60s van, so it had carpet on the inside, probably shag. And he tried to chase it down, but actually couldn't chase it. And really didn't think more about that until years later. Actually, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I called his ex-wife. My brother's past that. I got a hold of his ex-wife through Facebook. And we hadn't talked in years. She'd left him actually in the 70s. And I brought that up, and she said, oh, yeah. And then I remember him telling me about a Bigfoot. So I asked her tell me about this Bigfoot. Well, apparently she was in a Volkswagen Bug with my niece. Her daughter at the time was probably 1 or 2, and my brother. And they were down on 8th Street, which is actually the famous Cayocha that runs through Miami. But 8th Street actually goes east to west all the way out towards the Everglades. Back then, where Sweetwater was the last area where people were actually building condos and apartments and houses and stuff. And just past Sweetwater was the Everglades. You can actually take 8th Street all the way to Naples. And they were just driving down the road, and suddenly a Bigfoot walked out across them. So this would have been a rural area. And the only thing she could really remember, she couldn't remember the year. She knows it was the early 70s, but she said it stunk so bad she'll never forget how much and how bad it stunk. Well, it turns out in the early 70s there was a skunk ape sightings all over South Florida. They were actually seen by park rangers at one of the national parks down there in the Everglades, and several other people had reports, I don't know if it was 72 or 73, all over South Florida of what they called a skunk ape, and basically it was like a Bigfoot, but it had more of like a lighter colored hair down its back towards its body. And then she started telling me about at the time that she was with my brother Henry and another friend, and they were out someplace, and I don't know if they were out towards the Everglades, and a UFO showed up, and she said this thing was shining lights down on them, and they started to hide in the trees to try to hide from them. But she couldn't really elaborate much on the story and tell me much about it. But just, I know my brother, I know her, and I know they weren't lying. So when people talk about Bigfoot and stuff like that, I believe it because there's so many reports, and I've actually had somebody in my family who would not make something like this up. And it's nuts. I don't know how to explain it, but, it's weird.
Right. I think that's the issue, is that we really don't know how to explain, so many things when it comes to not just UFOs, but anything else that you'd consider paranormal. A lot of times there's just no explanation at all. Getting back to the skunk ape, so to speak.
Have you ever heard? Have you ever heard it? Had you ever heard?
Yes,
of it?
I have.
Okay.
I think
I'm just curious.
Mysterious Universe or somewhere I heard that before. Yeah. But everyone always says that a Bigfoot stinks.
Yeah,
that's the thing you always hear about it.
Well, her name, I'm not going to say her name, but she said the most memorable thing was how bad it smelled. She said it was just horrible. And she said they were just freaked out. And I said, well, what did you do? What happened? Where did it go? And she really could not remember stuff. And being in the early 70s, it's not quite surprising. So another
now, what did you think about what Greg Bishop just said about people's memories and how they, conceive of like an incident like that?
I do believe, there's a lot of studies been done that people tend to change what they remember, or things change, from what they remember what actually happened. But I do think that in memorable instances, things that are really traumatic or just special in someone's life, you actually do remember things pretty well. Then I guess it would depend on the individual too. I've got a pretty good memory on things that I'm interested in, and some of those photographic. Sometimes I've remembered keys, long strings of numbers. I do machining from one day to the next. I could see them in my head, but not everybody's like that. But yeah, it's hard to say. You know, this goes back to like people having regressions for alien abduction and stuff. You know, you don't. It's hard to really say. Did it really exactly happen that way? Do they elaborate, or is it like when you're dreaming that your brain may add stuff to it, or just change and modify things?
Yeah, speaking of that, I want to say a relative talked to me recently about sleep paralysis. And I know there's been people talking about sleep paralysis and abductions and how, they're two different things and all that. But this relative explained to me the sleep paralysis, and it sounded just like what some people do say about an alien abduction encounter. He said he thought he could see beings, and he was totally frozen. He couldn't move at all. And he basically forced himself to wake up out of it. But interesting. And now I'm not saying that, I'm going to get some hate mail if I say that all abductions are, sleep paralysis, because I know a lot of people claim that they've happened during daytime and all that.
I remember when Bud Hopkins' book came out. I don't know how I stumbled across it, but I did, and I read it. And then, of course, I've been researching this for over 30 years. I mean, ever since that little UFO thing happened with me and my brother in the vehicle, I started it was a bug. I actually have read von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, and it just stirred something inside me that just made me want to look for more truth. Basically, I'm just looking for the truth. I think everybody on your show that comes and listens to your show, they're trying to find out what the truth is.
Yeah. And do you think that truth will ever be found?
Well, if the truth is that there's several civilizations that may be coming here, but they've been coming here for a long time, that our bodies are actually vessels for a soul, and that we maybe reincarnate, and that maybe aliens are actually coming here and genetically taking eggs from women and from stuff from men, and actually creating hybrids and either using them themselves on other planets or on this planet in hidden bases underground and stuff like that. No, I don't think there'll ever be any disclosure. Because, I mean, the government's not going to come out and tell people stuff like that. And I believe some of what I just said. There's just what bugs me a lot about modern ufology is the nuts and bolts people. Because all I've heard about for 30-something years is the nuts and bolts people. And then Betty and Barney Hill happened in the 60s, and that was investigated. And then you had Bud Hopkins and other people that came out that started looking into the abduction thing. And it definitely seems like there's something to this. I don't know how many UFO sightings are seen just in the U.S. alone that are reported every year, something like, 10,000?
I think you hear up to 30,000 worldwide.
Well, 30,000 worldwide that's reported, okay? So let's say that's just, 2%, or maybe it's 5% or 10%. They're doing something. They're not, all these crafts and all these things people are seeing in UFOs, if there are actually extraterrestrial vehicles, they must be doing something. That you wouldn't just be spending all this time and being seen all over the place just collecting dirt samples. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, interesting, Bobby. Well, I'm going to ask if you can hang on here for a minute, but I'm going to ask, because you're my lifeline right now, but I'll ask if someone else would like to call in or Skype in. That number is 603-967-4030, or the Skype name is Marty Willis. That's MartyYwillis. So, Bobby, we met, and please do call in, and I'll just join you to the call. We met 3 years ago at the conference down, 3 years ago, last June, at the conference down in North Carolina. Now, how far away from that conference did you travel to get there?
Oh, me? I hate to say it, it was like 22 minutes.
Yeah. That was great. I still remember that as being such a great conference. It wasn't overly attended, unfortunately.
No,
but anyway,
really
we have a call
that.
coming in, and I don't see any way to add it to the call, so I'll try here and see what happens. I might hang up on you, Bobby. That's what I'm saying. So if so, nice talking to you. Whoops, the call just dropped. So I'll encourage that Skype call to try one more time. And that could be because it might have gone into a message or something.
All right, well, let me go ahead and drop and let them come on in because I'm sweating bullets here.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bobby.
All these experts on your show.
All right, take care. Hello, this is Martin. And is this, I think I see the picture up on the screen. Is this Chris?
Martin, yes, this is Chris. How are you?
Chris Lambright from Texas. How you doing?
Just fine. I won't keep you for too long. You have an interesting caller on right now. And I
no, he's gone. You're on the spot now.
Well. The only thing that I wanted to mention, one thing in particular that occurred to me when I was listening to Greg was you were talking about Leo Sprinkle and how Greg made the comment that Leo Sprinkle thought Paul was over the edge and that this happened months before Paul ever called the Air Force. That's backwards. In fact, when Greg, and don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for Greg, and I think his book is worth reading. But even when he wrote it and I talked to him, I said I had no problem with it, but he started it about 6 months too late. Because one of the things that I found that I'd mentioned was the fact that Paul had called the Air Force back in January. So this was months before he ever got Leo Sprinkle down there. So the Air Force was well aware of the fact that Paul had gotten the films from his roof long before Leo Sprinkle showed up. Now, what Paul's mental state may have been, I never spoke to Paul. I spoke to him on the phone several times, but I never spoke to him about his mental state. So I just wanted to clarify that the interest in Leo Sprinkle and the girl at his house, that of course involved things because Paul had an interest up in Dulce. But he called the Air Force in January, and I have that in a document that Paul sent me, written up by Ernest Edwards, when some guys from Sandia had come to talk to him and asked him about it. And he states first thing up front, first contact with Paul Benewitz, January of 1980. So that was long before Leo Sprinkle and any of the other Dulce rigmarole that most people think about. So just a side thing, but for the listeners who caught into the fact and were thinking that Paul was gone down the golden path before any of that, no, he was on it when he called the Air Force back in January. So anyway, just wanted to fill that in, then I can get out of your way.
No, I want you to stay on for a minute. There's a couple of questions I have about the why was this girl regressed at Paul Benewitz's place? Well, do you think she was disinformation as well?
Boy, this is the thing. Two questions. One, I believe I can give you some good information on. The second one, it would be just my opinion. But because I spent a good bit of time tracking down the chronology of all of this, leading up to how this woman ended up at Paul's house, Paul had an interest in the area around Dulce because he had met Gabe Valdez back when the cattle mutilation things were going on. So Paul had an interest in Dulce area, not because of underground bases, but back in the middle of 79, even months before any of what most people think about his involvement came in. Because he had an interest up there, Gabe Valdez knew him. He had ridden around with Gabe Valdez. Then later on, Paul had gone back 2 or 3 times up to that area in and around Dulce because of the things that he had seen and caught on pictures of up to that point. Then later on, sometime in the beginning of 1980, and this was after he'd called the Air Force, and I think it's an important distinction to make that he was interested in the area up around Dulce because that was what was going on in his life at the end of 79, his interest. It was before the first snows, because he wrote it that way. He had gone to make one last trip to Dulce before the first snows in 79. He came home. Then he happened to be, I outline all of this in the book, but then he happened to be on his roof, and that's when he saw the things that he filmed coming off the Manzanos. He calls the Air Force within a few weeks of that. Well, sometime in I'm thinking it's around April of 1980. I'm in the same position with Greg. My memory is just not perfect on these details right now. But sometime in around 1980, suddenly this woman calls she contacts somebody in the state police in northern New Mexico and starts describing something that she thinks had occurred on some trip she was coming back across northern Mexico. Well, of course, Gabe Valdez was well known, and the state policeman who she talked to put her in touch with Gabe Valdez, who contacted Paul, because where she seemed to be saying this had occurred, and there was some talk of if I'm not mistaken, of her and her son in the car witnessing a UFO and maybe an abduction. Well, Gabe puts her in touch with Paul, and Paul was all over it, because where she seemed to be saying this might have occurred on her trip back this night happened to be in the area that he thought was around Dulce. Boom, that connects her to Gabe, to Paul, Dulce. Paul gets her down to his house. Now keep in mind, this was already months. I think she was in his home in May, if I'm not mistaken. But so we're talking 4 or 5 months after he'd already called the Air Force. So all this other stuff, the fact that he has these films, that he's talked to Richard Doty, that Ernest Edwards knows who he is, because even Ernest Edwards mentions having been at Paul's house looking at some of the things Paul was already working on, his electronic recordings by that time. So all of this stuff was building up, and in my opinion, I have questions about how she so perfectly ends up in Paul's house, and Leo Sprinkle comes in and regresses her, and to my understanding, at least what I think was, Paul wasn't so sure of Leo for whatever reason or not, but it was in Leo's regression that all of this other underground, the whole idea of underground bases, from what I was able to determine, seems, as it ties to Paul, to have directly or indirectly come out of what this woman described while she was supposedly under regressive hypnosis, having been taken into some underground facility or cavernous place. And this gets Paul to thinking, well, if she was near Dulce, underground, boom, and now we have underground bases. This is that's my feeling about it, and it's one of the reasons I am not, I just don't follow on the underground base scenario, at least as it relates to Paul, because I don't believe that there was ever any underground base activity per se. Although, I will say, what's a base? Right? Could there be some facility somewhere? Or are we talking about some huge cavernous thing like we got in years later with Schneider and all these other people claiming it's some massive, once it gets blown out of proportion, you don't even know which part's real or which part isn't.
Is that Phil Schneider or something
Phil
like that?
Phil Schneider, right. Eventually you have people who now everybody's picking up an angle. But that happens, unfortunately, I think, with a lot of cases that started out as pretty solid, or at least had some evidence to them and some support, and eventually somebody gets a hold of it and runs with it and makes the circuit, and now it's tunnels going across the continent, that sort of thing. So I don't know. But I've never been quite certain of how this woman seemed to be led to Paul at a perfect time to ratchet his attention back on the Dulce area. And it was really from that point onwards that Dulce, as some underground place, took off, and Paul seemed to really be focused on it again. Project Beta, the whole Beta business stems from Paul's interest once again in Dulce and thinking that he had sent me some black and white pictures from years ago showing what he said was this aircraft that had crashed up and around the area, and nobody ever found it. I don't know that there was any support for it, and I had questions. I even asked Paul about it, and he seemed frustrated why I couldn't see what he was saying in the pictures. I never quite understood that. But in my opinion, Dulce and what Paul filmed that got him in trouble with the Air Force or got their attention, those are two totally separate aspects of Paul's interest, let's say. It's like I have an interest in the Socorro case. I also have an interest in the Benewitz case. But they're two totally separate cases just because they both occurred in New Mexico. And somebody might make something out of that. But I don't think we should necessarily construe everything that came out after the fallout, as I call it, of Paul's involvement with everything else that came about once the Air Force knew. That's been my contention. Once he called them and told them, because I even asked Paul one time, I said, Paul, when you called the Air Force, didn't you feel like you kind of let the cat out of the bag? And he was like, well, you can't be too paranoid. And I understand his thinking, but look at what we have now. We have even Richard Doty going on this Mirage Men movie you talked about and saying all of the things that I'm thinking, where are our congressmen and people listening to the fact that here you have an AFOSI guy acknowledging that I think he leads in by saying, oh, Paul was very patriotic and ran the flag up, and people like that are easy to fool. Wow. So here we have Doty making all of these claims, but none of them seem to tie. Nobody seems to be focusing on the fact that he would never have gotten involved if Paul hadn't picked up the phone and called Ernest Edwards, who put him in touch with his AFOSI guy, who was Doty, and boom. And if this happened in January, why don't we see any records of the first 6, 7, 8 months? First mention that you see of Paul comes out in those what are called the Kirtland documents that reference things that were happening later in August, September through November. They don't specifically state that that's when Paul first called them. They just mention Paul as having had an interest in this, and people draw the impression that, well, that Paul stuff must have been occurring back in the summer and later on. But
I gotta interrupt you here because I know there's a couple of callers that want to call in. But first of all, I want to just let the listener know this is Chris Lambright, who has a really good book I recommend. It's called X Descending, and all you have to do is look that up online. So X Descending is the name of the book, where he talks about Paul Benewitz and as well as Ray Stanford and some of his sightings. So before you go, Chris, can you quickly, in a nutshell, say, I know you said you're working on some things. What's new?
Well, since you mentioned Ray Stanford and I'd mentioned Socorro, I recently moved to Austin, and because I have some interest in screenwriting and film, and I had spent the last few years working on what I hope eventually will turn into a documentary. I plan on doing something that will be much more realistic as far as Socorro, coincidentally, which I think I sent you the link to the article that came out in the India newspaper recently. I got a Google alert on that. Yeah. And this is one of those cases which I understand completely Greg's mention when he was asking about the cases that had multiple witnesses. And I was pleased to read some of the comments that went through, people naming them off. You're right, the Ariel School. There are a lot of them. But Socorro is one that I think, if not simply because of Zamora's reputation, but subsequently, since I've actually become a friend with Richard Holder Jr., who's found some more information and been able to talk to him about his father, and I've become acutely aware that, there's a whole other angle, undercurrent of the investigation that most people have no idea about. And like I said, I've spent a lot of time interested in the case, and it wasn't until the last few years that it suddenly took off. But I've wanted to do maybe a short film, short documentary of some sort or other on that, with some really great graphics. So you would see, as realistic as is possible without being able to drive to New Mexico and film on the spot. But I've been working on some things in some 3D graphics programs, Maya and some others, and putting some things together. That's what I mentioned to you earlier today. Right. But I'm hoping, I hope I can get that done. The animation parts are pretty well done, but now it's time to do the legwork, so to speak.
Yeah, I only have a few minutes to talk to at least one person that was trying to call in. So thanks so much, Chris. And by the way, Chris is a great artist. You can also check out his artwork. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thanks. Have a great night, Martin.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later. All right. Now I'm going to give the call back to the person that was trying to ring me just a minute ago.
Hello.
Hello. You're on the air.
Oh, hi, Martin.
And what's your name and where are you from?
This is Phil, and I'm currently in Indiana.
Hi, Phil. Long-time listener. How you doing?
Not too bad. I hope I don't disappoint too many of your listeners with my stories of the fact that I haven't had many two-hearted ales like the last time I called. So, anyway, what I wanted to bring up was something I've talked to you about once or twice, I think, and it was about a book I found in my parents' room when I was a kid back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I think I got you to ask one of your guests what they thought about it. And it was a Frank Edwards book, which I think the name of it was Stranger Than Science or something like that. And it was a weird book, and I looked at it and didn't really know much about it. I was not that terribly old at the time, probably 15 or so. But I noticed a story in there called UFOs Stopped the Little League Game. And I also noticed noticed that it said Paris, Illinois, which is where I'm from. And so naturally I thought, wow, this is weird. So I read the story, and the story is not that terribly remarkable, but kind of fun anyway. It was a Little League game at the Legion in Paris, and the story went that the kids were playing baseball, and they all stopped when these orbs came over the field, and they were then further amazed to see jets flying after them, because there was an Air Force base about probably 50 miles as the crow flies from Paris that scrambled jets. The name of the Air Force base was Chanute Air Force Base. So I thought, okay, this is really weird, and I read the rest of the story, and there was a name where they quoted this guy named John Ball. Well, as it turned out, Johnny Ball was the bus driver for our cross-country team. So I brought the book, and I said, hey, Johnny, what's up with this? Because I guess you'd have to fully get, if you haven't seen a Frank Edwards book, how weird some of the stories are. Like you might not buy it. So I asked Johnny, okay, is this story real? And he goes, yep, that's exactly what happened. And I thought, wow. So then later on, I found out that none other than my brother played in the game, which added, further credence. He said, yeah, that's exactly what happened. So anyway, I'm sitting there looking at this stranger than science book, knowing that a story in it is just 100% true. And I looked at all the other stories, and I thought, okay, this is weird. You never know. But, I'm sure there were a lot of crazy stories in it, but that particular one was absolutely true. And there never was any resolution to it or anything. It just, the UFOs are buzzing around, the jets chased them off, and the game played on.
You do hear that a lot, them chasing them.
Yeah.
I don't know what they'd do if they ever caught them.
I do have one other story, too, that I witnessed. That it was when I was working in Kalamazoo. I worked at a large major pharmaceutical company, which will go nameless at the moment. And I was in my office, which had a expansive view to the north of Kalamazoo. And I looked out the window, and I was actually talking to a friend on a phone at the time. And I saw these things up in the air that were at what appeared to be an extreme height, and they were kind of bobbing around, because I heard Alejandro once talking about things like this, and it kind of reawakened that memory in me of seeing this. But I thought so much of it, I just took the phone outside and was standing there at 2 in the afternoon, bright sunny day, looking at these things that, they weren't birds, for one thing. They were at extreme height, and it was a cloudless sky, but they looked, the only thing I could think of was dolphins, as weird as that might sound. That's kind of how they acted, and they just kind of propagated along the sky and were gone. And I don't know what to make of it, but it was a really strange sort of thing that I just wanted to put out there for your audience to hear.
It's funny. I heard someone else say something similar, but I can't remember the details of it in conversation. And it was someone that was at my house at one point when the subject of UFOs came up. They saw something like fish or something in the sky, it was like a jellyfish.
They looked alive.
Yeah.
But they weren't, because there are, around Kalamazoo, we're not that terribly far from the big lake, which is Lake Michigan, and there are seagulls around. We see those all the time. They like to hang out in the parking lots. But, whatever these things were, they were much bigger and much higher and didn't look anything else like a bird. So.
Interesting. Well, thanks, Phil. And good to talk to you, and we'll be talking soon.
Alrighty.
All right.
Great,
take care.
Martin. Thanks.
All right, that's it for calls, and I'm going to start the pre-recorded news with Alejandro right now. All right, so this is we're doing things different, as I said earlier. This is pre-recorded news. It's actually not pre-recorded now because I'm recording it, but this is with Alejandro, and we're going to do the news toward the end of the show this week, and not the beginning. How are you, Alejandro?
Sorry, I'm good. Just having a little refreshment there.
Yes, I hear that. So how's everything going out there in Arizona for you?
Everything is going very well here. Keeping very, very busy. The conference, we just posted some new speakers, so out there promoting that, getting people excited for the UFO Congress. One of the most exciting things, however, is that you are there, Martin Willis from the UFO podcast, and so that sets the excitement levels so high.
Well, while we're on this subject already, let's. I know you have some great speakers there. Can you talk about a couple of them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we just listed here. I'll talk about the special one. So we have. I just listed a few people, and a few of these people have brand new talks you've never heard before. First of all, Richard Dolan. Everybody loves, well, I shouldn't say everybody loves Richard Dolan. Many people love Richard Dolan. He's a well-loved and beloved. He's kind of gone into lots of conspiracy stuff, but he was like, Alejandro, I'm going to do something for your conference. You know, I know what you guys are into, UFO research. And I said, we would be flattered to have you do something like that. So he's doing one on media bias in UFO coverage, culture, policy, or something else. But yeah, this is a special talk he's put together just for the Congress, so that's exciting. David Marler also has a brand new talk he's going to be covering the 1942 L.A. incident, so the Battle of L.A., and he's got new research and investigation that he's done, especially around the photographs. That is really interesting. So if you remember, there's this famous photograph. If you don't know about this famous photograph, even better, because David's going to tell you all about it and about how he tracked down where it came from and all of this terribly interesting information. And on top of that, we have Dr. John Alexander, who is a colonel in Army intelligence. He's worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. He's a defense consultant. And for all of those reasons, many people believe that he is working for the Illuminati and MJ-12 and is trying to hide the truth. I argue differently, and I think a lot of people forget that he is into UFOs. Yeah. And he's talking about some crazy case. He says that this is his recent firsthand experience with a case so convoluted it defies both explanation and common sense. Defying common sense is not that original in this field in particular. Yeah. But he says this is a UFO sighting he had with a lot of credible people, and he says he thinks it included some spontaneous healing, recordings of orbs, possible spiritual beings, and other phenomena.
Now, this is the John Alexander?
Yeah.
I mean, that is just wild? So different from what you'd expect from him.
Exactly. So, once he told me this, it was like, whoa, people are this is really exciting. I'm a big fan of John. He and I get together or, talk occasionally. And, just like everybody else in this field, we don't see eye to eye necessarily on everything. But this sounds very fascinating. In fact, this sounds more fringe than I am. So, so this is pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah. Dave Marler, one of my favorite people. One of the things I wanted to just mention, the late Terry Hansen. He died actually very young, back in 2014, I think it was. But anyway, he covered what Richard Dolan wants to cover, basically, and that is journalism in the UFO. I'm not sure if you knew Terry. Did you?
No, I think that I have a feeling that I wanted to interview him, but we never made it happen, or if we did, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I can't remember for sure, though.
But, there's some...
But,
I'm
a lot of
to hear
people
that
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am, too, and to see what Dolan does with it. Because I know he may be able to have... he probably will have information that we're not aware of. So, yeah, I'm also very interested to hear his talk on that.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I know it's far away from now, but it'll come up quickly. And I got to tell the listener that if you are planning on coming to the UFO Congress, I'm definitely going to be there. I'd love to hang out with you. And also, if you can get a room, you want to get that as soon as possible because they go fast. And the resort there, I can't pronounce it. Can you pronounce it, please?
Wekopa.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place to stay. It's almost surreal. It's so relaxing and everything. So I'd get a room as soon as possible, and it's reasonable too. It's not overpriced. So definitely.
Well, at least during the conference, it's like half price.
Right.
At the conference, if not more. So.
Yeah. So that's great. So I guess we're here to talk a little bit about UFO. What's the latest things going on in UFO news?
Latest things going on in UFO news. Got a couple sightings here I want to talk to you about. They're pretty cool. The one that we posted today, I feel, is cooler than this first one I'll talk about. But I'll get people excited to hear about that one. But this one's still interesting and strange. This is a witness in Tennessee who videotaped what he called an orange line. He was in Nashville. He said that this took place on August 15, 2016. It was at night. He was walking to his normal spot for smoking, and he noticed this very bright orange light in the sky, nothing like he'd ever seen before. It was glowing. He said it kind of looked like a street lamp, but it was too big for that. And it does look like it's off in the distance, which would make it very large. You know what? He talks about the moon. Oh, I just came up with a new theory of what this could be. But it was big. It looks like, from the video, to be on a hillside. It was about 9 p.m. Well, he said, though, that, a couple hours before the sighting, he started to feel uneasy, like something was watching him. And then after the sighting, he started to feel, more relaxed and everything, but strangely calm, even, he says. But when you look at the video, you do see a couple radio towers and then this object to the right. And it's strange. I don't know what the heck it is. It's this longer kind of orangish line. He also provided an image of the area during the day. Someone in the comments made a comment that, hey, that looked like a hill with a couple of radio towers. Why can't you see that in the daytime image he took? And that's a good question. Perhaps he was more zoomed in the video than it is in the picture there. So, or he got the wrong area or something. So I'm not sure. But the object is strange. You see it for a while, very bright, and then it fades out and it's gone. So normally I might think maybe cars on a hill. My theory I just come up with, but I don't know that it fits because it doesn't necessarily totally look like it, is maybe the setting moon. That's the top of the moon as it's slowly setting.
That could very well be.
I guess it's, that might be.
I saw that video, so I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
Because it looks strange. It looks really weird. Now that I mentioned the moon, I thought, hey, maybe that's it. I don't know, but it's a weird. What do you think? That's a pretty weird one, huh?
Yeah, I still think it's worth looking into. And to caution the listener, if you check out that video, it's on openminds.tv. There's also a link in our show notes to it, but there is some foul language in that video.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Because we don't use foul language on our show. Do you?
No, mine is safe for work.
Yeah, so is mine. Yeah. Chris O'Brien, I think, has said a bad word before, maybe once or twice on my show.
He said a joke on my show that I couldn't stop laughing.
That included a bad word?
No, it was actually, yeah, sort of. Yes, there was but anyway.
But I think that's about it. Maybe I think one or two other people have let one slip here or there, but that's about all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so bad words in the video.
Right.
But there's another video with more bad words. I think there might have been. UFO videos have bad words. That's how you know they're legit, I guess. Right. But this one's cool. I just posted this just a few moments ago. This is in a small town in New York between Florida and Gosh. It looks like Gosh or Goshi, but Gosh is I guess the way you say it. But this is a video that was taken on August 4th, 2016. This person was driving home with their girlfriend between 9 and 10 p.m., and they saw off to their left this lit up craft, they say, with blinking lights. There's not much to go on in the description, but the video is really weird. It's like this disc-shaped object with a notch in it that has a blinking light in the middle of that notch. So it's very strange. It looks very large, and you can see it very well, and it's a really weird video. It's being investigated currently. So we'll see what the MUFON investigators come up with, but pretty weird video. You watched this one too, right?
I did, and just to tell the listener, please check this one out because the thing is crystal clear and something you normally don't see in a nighttime video shot on a cell phone. Crystal clear, and again, there's a little bit of foul language, but to be more cautioned, the guy's not very pleasant to his girlfriend, I think it might be, or wife or whatever, and mother. At one point he says, "Ma, shut up," or something like that. So, yeah.
He's being mean. So I hope that he watches his behavior on the video and he realizes that he's a little rough with him and he needs to apologize.
Yeah.
And be a little nicer.
Especially if that goes viral.
Hey, shut up!
He's going to get some flack if that goes viral. And,
no kidding.
Sure. The aliens could abduct him and show him, what's what. They should just do that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, the video, it has a notch in it. And if people are familiar with the very famous Turkey UFO videos, that was kind of half cylindrical with a notch. It kind of is reminiscent of that a bit. But I think, and sad to say, people have shared with me that notch in the Turkey video is probably from the Turkey video actually being a bright light like a star, having a refraction type of thing happen inside the lens. That's possibly what this is, but I don't think so. It's not the same. And there's this blinking light inside of the notch. No. In the video, they talk about maybe it's a blimp. So maybe, but it's pretty weird.
Yeah, I think it's actually it's one of the better videos that I've seen. And I'm wondering, are you aware if Mark D'Antonio has taken a look at this?
No, it's funny you should ask, though, because when I posted this on the Open Minds UFO News Facebook forum, by the way, Open Minds UFO News, we do have a closed Facebook forum there, closed group, but all you have to do is ask to join it and you'll be able to get in. We just ask that you are not a jerk. It's only closed so we could kick out jerks. Mm-hmm. But in there, I asked, I said, hey, this is weird. What do you think, Mark? And he has not replied yet. There's a couple people that have, including Charles Lamoureux, who has taken some interesting videos himself in Canada. So, people can go. I'm sure Mark will respond at some point. But, I'm really interested to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I'd like to know that as well. I was wondering why I got kicked out of that. You can't be a jerk. Wow.
Yeah, you can't be an a-hole. Yeah. And you, sir, are a grade A. No, you did not get kicked out.
I know. Yeah. No, that's you find that. How do you go on Facebook and then what do you search on Facebook?
Open Minds or Open Minds UFO News.
And that's how you get to that page. Again, all you have to do is ask to join.
Yeah, just ask to join. I mean, we have an Open Minds page where we post our stuff, but there's a lot more conversation that happens in the news, in the closed group, and a lot more of analysis of videos and stuff. So it's more for discussion. That's why, we got to watch it over and make sure some of these jagobs don't get in there. Is that a bad word?
No, when you say it like that, no.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
Yeah, no, that's the right way to say it. All right, so that's it, isn't it?
That's it, people.
Okay, so now I'm going to have you hang in for the closing of my show, if you would.
Oh, okay.
All right. So that's it for our show this evening. Thanks so much for listening. And yes, this was pre-recorded with the news, but I'm not editing it at all, so it's just like it's live. You can look at it that way. But our guest next week will be Joan Bird on Montana UFOs. Interesting woman that actually met in Phoenix at the UFO Congress. So she'll be on next week. And I want to thank a couple of people. First of all, Greg Bishop for being on our show. Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music for the show, a fan over in Ireland. And also Alejandro Rojas for doing the news with me. Thank you, Alejandro.
You're welcome.
All right. So we'll see you next week. So everyone, remember to keep your eyes to the sky.